The large conference room at the Pentagon was packed with military officials in pressed uniforms, their chests heavy with medals and ribbons. The afternoon sun streamed through tall windows, highlighting dust particles floating in the air, particles that were about to become very relevant to everyone present. At the front of the room stood Dr. Lee, a brilliant scientist in her mid-40s, her hands steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. She had rehearsed this presentation countless times, but facing a room full of skeptical generals was different from practicing in front of her lab team. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice clear and confident, "what you're about to see will change warfare as we know it." She clicked her remote, and the screen behind her lit up with technical diagrams of what looked like a large chamber filled with complex machinery. A general in the front row couldn't help but snort. "Doctor, we've seen shrink rays in movies. Are you seriously suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything, General," Dr. Lee interrupted politely. "I'm showing you what we've already accomplished." She pressed another button, and video footage began playing. It showed a mouse being placed in the chamber. After a bright flash, the mouse was gone. The camera zoomed in, and there it was, perfectly healthy but smaller than a grain of sand. Murmurs filled the room. Someone laughed nervously. "Cute party trick," another official called out. "But what's the practical application?" Colonel Zhang, a weathered veteran with sharp eyes and graying temples, leaned forward in his seat. Unlike his colleagues, he wasn't laughing. He'd spent enough time in the field to know that sometimes the craziest sounding ideas were exactly what they needed. Dr. Lee clicked to the next slide. "Imagine soldiers who could infiltrate any facility undetected. Troops who could bypass any security system because they're literally smaller than the sensors can detect. A team that could carry out vital missions without anyone knowing they were ever there. And how exactly would these microscopic soldiers fight?" Someone called out mockingly. "Throw tiny punches?" The room erupted in laughter, but Dr. Lee remained unfazed. She switched to another video. This one showed a miniaturized bullet hitting a piece of metal. Despite its tiny size, it punched through with devastating force, all the power of a normal bullet concentrated into a pinpoint. The laughter died down. "The laws of physics work differently at this scale," Dr. Lee explained. "When we miniaturize something, it retains its mass and energy in a concentrated form. A tiny soldier would have the strength to lift objects hundreds of times their reduced size. A microscopic bullet would penetrate deeper than a normal one." Colonel Zhang stood up. "How long can they stay miniaturized?" "Currently, the effect lasts 48 hours before automatic reversion. We're working on extending that window." "Side effects?" he pressed. "None detected in over 200 animal trials. The process is completely reversible." The room had grown quiet now. The implications were starting to sink in. No more need for massive strike teams. No more worrying about satellite detection. A squad could literally walk through the front door of a hostile facility carried in on someone's shoe. "The chamber is ready for human trials," Dr. Lee announced. "All we need is approval and volunteers." More murmuring, but this time it wasn't dismissive. Colonel Zhang looked around the room, meeting the eyes of his fellow officers. They all knew what this could mean. The ability to insert troops anywhere, completely undetected. The tactical advantages were staggering. "There's one more thing," Dr. Lee added, her voice softening. "We've already successfully miniaturized and restored complex machinery. Weapons, communications equipment, even small vehicles. Everything a modern soldier needs, just on a microscopic scale." She pulled up images of tiny but perfect replicas of standard military gear. The soldiers would have full capabilities just in an invisible package. Think about it. A fully equipped team that could travel through air vents, hide in plain sight, and strike with the element of total surprise. Colonel Zhang was already imagining the possibilities. Covert operations that were truly covert. Rescue missions where the rescuers could walk right past the guards. Intelligence gathering with zero risk of detection. "This is either the biggest breakthrough in military history," he said slowly, "or the most elaborate practical joke I've ever seen." Dr. Lee smiled. "I can arrange a demonstration with a volunteer from this room. Anyone willing to be temporarily shrunk to the size of a dust mote." The room fell silent. Theory was one thing, but personally stepping into that chamber was another matter entirely. Colonel Zhang looked at the faces around him, generals and officials who were suddenly very interested in their notepads or phones. Finally, he stood up. "I'll do it. If this works, we need to know everything about it. If it doesn't," he shrugged, "well, I've survived worse odds." Dr. Lee's smile widened. "Excellent. Should we schedule the demonstration for tomorrow morning?" As the room buzzed with renewed excitement and apprehension, no one noticed the tiny speck on the windowsill, a dust mote that wasn't a dust mote at all, but rather one of Dr. Lee's earlier test subjects, observing everything with microscopic cameras. The real demonstration had already begun, and none of them even knew it. The future of warfare was about to change forever, one invisible soldier at a time. And those who had laughed would soon learn that the smallest army could be the deadliest of all. 2 weeks after the demonstration, Colonel Zhang stood in front of 50 of the best soldiers he'd ever seen. They were gathered in a secure underground facility that officially didn't exist, about to volunteer for something that most people would consider impossible. "I won't sugarcoat this," he said, his voice echoing in the concrete room. "What we're about to do has never been attempted before. You've all seen the videos. You know what's at stake. This is your last chance to walk away, no questions asked." Nobody moved. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were the ones who volunteered for the missions nobody else would take. The impossible missions. The ones that changed history without ever making it into the history books. "Sir," spoke up Lieutenant Patel, a combat engineer with 3 tours under his belt. "We've all heard the jokes. The Dust Bunnies Brigade. The microscopic misfits. But we've also seen what that chamber can do. We're ready." The colonel nodded, pride visible in his eyes. "Dr. Lee, they're all yours." Dr. Lee stepped forward, holding a tablet displaying complex readings. "We'll start with a 5-person squad. The chamber has been calibrated for human subjects." She looked up at the soldiers. "Who's first?" 5 hands shot up immediately. The chosen squad stepped forward. Lieutenant Patel, 2 Special Forces operators, a combat medic, and a communications specialist. Each one had been handpicked not just for their skills, but for their ability to think creatively in impossible situations. "The process is painless," Dr. Lee explained as they suited up in specialized gear designed to shrink with them. "You'll feel a slight tingling sensation like static electricity. When you open your eyes, everything will look bigger, much bigger." The first squad entered the chamber together. The remaining soldiers watched through reinforced glass as blue light filled the room. There was a flash, a soft humming sound, and then nothing. The chamber was empty. Dr. Lee quickly moved to a nearby microscope station. "Squad 1, radio check." A tiny voice crackled through the specially designed communication system. "This is Lieutenant Patel. Radio check confirmed. And, Doc, you might want to see this." The video feed from their miniaturized cameras appeared on the main screen. The soldiers were standing on what looked like a vast plain, but it was actually the metal floor of the chamber. Dust particles around them looked like boulders. A droplet of condensation in the distance appeared as large as a lake. "Mobility check," Colonel Zhang ordered. The camera feeds showed the squad testing their equipment. At their current size, they could jump incredible distances relative to their size, yet maintain perfect control thanks to their reduced mass. Their weapons, shrunk with them, functioned perfectly. "This is incredible," one of the soldiers whispered. "It's like being in another world." Over the next hour, the squad ran through basic maneuvers. They practiced moving as a unit, testing how their reduced size affected their capabilities. They discovered they could climb what would normally be smooth surfaces, as microscopic imperfections provided plenty of handholds at their scale. "Ready for Phase 2, Colonel Zhang announced. "Time to see how you operate in a real environment." A small maze was set up on a nearby table, but to the miniaturized soldiers, it was like a massive complex. They had to navigate through it while avoiding obstacles and completing objectives. What looked like simple turns and corridors to normal-size observers were vast chambers and long hallways to the tiny squad. "Contact front." Lieutenant Patel's voice crackled through the comm. A small mechanical drone, also miniaturized, had been released into the maze. To the squad, it appeared as a massive hostile robot, its gears and servos grinding like industrial machinery. The team moved with perfect coordination, using their tiny size to their advantage. They could hide in crevices that, at their scale, were like natural bunkers. Their miniaturized weapons packed the same punch as full-size ones, just concentrated into microscopic projectiles. Back in the main room, the other soldiers watched in amazement. This wasn't just a proof of concept anymore. This was the future of warfare happening right in front of them. "Second squad, gear up," Colonel Jung ordered. "You're next." As the day progressed, more teams went through the process. Each squad discovered new advantages and challenges of operating at microscopic size. They learned to use air currents to their advantage, literally floating to their objectives. They found that sound traveled differently at their scale, requiring adjustments to their tactics. One soldier discovered by accident that they could walk on water. At their size, surface tension made water feel like a firm but bouncy surface. Another realized they could hide inside the fibers of clothing, turning any uniform into potential cover. "Think about what this means," Colonel Jung said to Dr. Lee as they watched the teams train. "No facility is secure against soldiers who can slip through air vents. No guard post can stop what they can't see." Dr. Lee nodded, but her expression was serious. "Just remember, Colonel, they're still human beings, no matter their size. They're not expendable just because they're microscopic." By the end of the day, 25 soldiers had been successfully miniaturized and restored. Each one emerged from the restoration process with a new understanding of what was possible. The jokes about the tiny army had stopped. Nobody was laughing anymore. As the teams debriefed, sharing their experiences and insights, Colonel Jung received an urgent message. His expression turned grave as he read it. "Dr. Lee," he called out, "how soon can the teams be ready for a real mission?" She checked her tablets. "The system is stable. They could deploy immediately if needed." "Why?" The colonel looked at his soldiers, now gathering around him, sensing the change in his demeanor. "Because we just got word of a situation, one that only a microscopic team can handle." The room fell silent. They had all trained for this moment, but now it was real. Somewhere out there was a threat that conventional forces couldn't touch. A threat that needed soldiers who could walk through keyholes and hide in plain sight. The tiny army was about to prove its worth. And this time, nobody was calling them the Dust Bunnies Brigade anymore. The briefing room was dead silent as satellite images flashed across the screen. Colonel Jung stood before his miniaturized combat teams, his face illuminated by the harsh glow of the projector. The images showed what looked like an ordinary industrial complex in a remote mountain region, but everyone knew better than to trust appearances. 3 hours ago, our intelligence satellites picked up unusual heat signatures from this facility, the colonel explained, pointing to thermal imaging overlays. "At first, we thought it was just another illegal drug lab. Then we got this." The screen switched to a series of photographs. They showed people in hazmat suits entering and leaving the building. Normal enough for a pharmaceutical facility, except for one detail: the suits were military grade, designed for the deadliest bioweapons. Our inside source managed to send these before going dark. New images appeared, showing specialized containment units and laboratory equipment that made Dr. Lee gasp audibly. "Those are genetic sequences," she said, her voice tight with concern. "Advanced ones. And those containment protocols, they're handling something extremely dangerous." Lieutenant Patel leaned forward. "How dangerous are we talking about, Doc?" "Those are BSL-4 level precautions, the highest biosafety level. Whatever they're working with in there could potentially wipe out entire cities." The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Everyone present knew about biological weapons, but this was different. The equipment they were looking at wasn't meant for crude bioweapons. It was for something far more sophisticated. "We've confirmed that a group of rogue scientists is developing something in there," Colonel Jung continued. "Something that makes normal bioweapons look like the common cold. We need to know what it is, and if necessary, shut it down. Permanently." "Why not just bomb it?" one of the soldiers asked. Dr. Lee shook her head. "Look at these air filtration systems. They're not just keeping things out, they're keeping something in. If we destroy the facility with conventional weapons, we risk releasing whatever they're developing. The fallout could be catastrophic. Which is why we're sending in the tiny army," Colonel Jung said. You'll infiltrate through the air filtration system, gather intel, and if necessary, neutralize the threat from the inside without compromising containment. The colonel pulled up a 3D model of the facility's ventilation system. To a normal-sized person, it was just a maze of ducts and filters, but to a microscopic soldier, it was a network of massive tunnels, perfect for infiltration. Teams will enter here, he pointed to an external vent. The facility's own air circulation will carry you inside. Once in, you'll split into 3 groups. Alpha Team will locate and secure any research data. Beta Team will identify the bioweapon and assess the threat level. Gamma Team will find and map potential weak points in case we need to neutralize the facility. Dr. Lee stepped forward. Remember, at your reduced size, you'll be operating in an environment full of potential hazards. Air currents that would normally be harmless could throw you across a room. Dust particles could be obstacles, and if they're actually working with pathogens. We'll be operating at the same scale as the bioweapons, Lieutenant Patel finished. Could we be infected? Your miniaturized state actually provides some protection, Dr. Lee explained. The pathogens would have trouble recognizing your cells as human targets due to the size difference. But I wouldn't take any chances. Full protective gear is mandatory. The teams began gearing up. Their miniaturized hazmat suits looked normal to them, but were invisible to the naked eye. Each soldier carried specialized equipment, sampling kits, miniature cameras, and weapons designed to work at microscopic scale. One more thing, Colonel Jung added, we've detected unusual energy signatures from the lower levels. Whatever they're doing down there, it's using massive amounts of power. Find out why. As the teams prepared to enter the miniaturization chamber, Dr. Lee made final adjustments to their equipment. Remember, you have a 48-hour window before automatic restoration. Once inside, establish a relay system so we can maintain communications through the facility's walls. Lieutenant Patel checked his team's gear one last time. Anyone having second thoughts? Nobody spoke up. They'd trained for this. They'd practiced operations at microscopic scale. But this was different. This was real, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The chamber hummed to life. Blue light filled the room, and then the soldiers were gone, reduced to specks smaller than dust. They were loaded into a specially designed carrier that would release them near the facility's air intake. Good hunting, Colonel Jung said into the comm. And remember, you might be small, but you're still the most lethal fighting force on the planet. As the carrier vehicle approached the facility under cover of darkness, the tiny soldiers prepared for insertion. Through their miniaturized night vision gear, the ventilation duct looked like a massive tunnel stretching into darkness. All teams, radio check, Lieutenant Patel whispered. One by one, the teams responded. Their voices were tiny but clear through the specialized communication system. Remember your training, he continued. At this size, everything is different. Use it to your advantage. Stay alert, stay alive. The first team moved toward the vent. At their scale, they could see microscopic imperfections in the metal that would serve as perfect handholds. What looked like a solid barrier to normal eyes was, to them, a textured landscape of opportunities. First team, you have a go. Colonel Jung's voice crackled through their comms. They stepped into the airflow, letting it carry them into the facility. To anyone watching, it would have looked like nothing more than dust being drawn into a vent. But this dust was armed, trained, and about to uncover secrets that would change everything. As they disappeared into the darkness of the ventilation system, none of them knew that they were about to discover something far worse than they'd imagined. The bioweapon was just the beginning. What waited in the facility's lower levels would test not just their training, but their understanding of what was possible. The tiny army was about to face its first real mission, and the fate of millions hung in the balance. Riding the air currents through the ventilation system felt like parachuting through a massive metal canyon. Lieutenant Patel's team surfed the invisible waves of air, using their specialized training to control their descent. What would have been a simple breeze to a normal-sized person was like a powerful river to them now. All teams maintained formation, Patel whispered into his comm. At their size, even the smallest sound could echo strangely through the metal ducts. Remember, we're looking for the main lab section. Watch for biological traces in the airflow. Through their microscopic night vision goggles, the world looked alien. Dust particles floated past like asteroids. The metal walls of the vent, which would appear smooth to normal eyes, were a landscape of ridges and valleys at their scale. "Movement ahead," reported Corporal Chen from Beta Team. "Something in the air, not normal dust patterns." The team slowed their descent, using tiny grappling lines to anchor themselves to the duct wall. Through their enhanced vision, they could see what Chen had spotted: microscopic particles moving in an organized pattern. "Those are engineered particles," Dr. Lee's voice crackled through their comms from base. "The facility must be testing airborne dispersal methods. Do not, I repeat, do not make contact with any suspicious particles." The soldiers activated their suits' enhanced protection modes. At their current size, even a single engineered particle could be dangerous if it was part of the bioweapon program. "First junction ahead," reported Lieutenant Patel. "Alpha Team, take the east branch toward the research section. Beta, you're with me heading down to the main lab. Gamma, proceed to the lower levels and begin mapping." The teams split up, each heading down different branches of the ventilation system. Alpha Team pulled themselves along using the microscopic textures in the metal as handholds. What looked like a smooth surface to normal eyes was like a rock-climbing wall to them. "This is Alpha Leader. We're picking up computer vibrations. Must be near a server room." "Beta Team here. We're detecting increased biological activity in the airflow, getting closer to the main lab." Lieutenant Patel's team continued their careful descent. Suddenly, their path opened into a larger space, an air-handling chamber above what had to be the main laboratory. Through small vents, they could see the room below. "Command, we have eyes on the target," Patel reported. "Multiple hostiles in full containment suits. At least a dozen computer stations. Wait." He paused, adjusting his optical enhancers. Something wasn't right about the way the scientists were moving. Their actions seemed too precise, too coordinated. "Sir," one of his team members whispered, "look at their suits. The design, it's not just for protection. They're pressure suits." Patel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "Command, are you seeing this? They're not just protecting themselves from their weapon. They're protecting themselves from something else." Back at base, Colonel Zhang and Dr. Lee exchanged worried looks. "What else do you see?" the colonel asked. "Multiple containment units along the walls, but they're different. Some kind of electromagnetic shielding. Why would they need that for a bioweapon?" Dr. Lee's voice was tense. "Lieutenant, can you get closer to one of the containment units? We need to see what's inside." The team carefully made their way down, using their miniaturized rappelling gear to descend to eye level with one of the units. What they saw made them freeze. "Command, it's not just a bioweapon. The particles, they're moving, not like normal Brownian motion. They're organizing themselves." "Organizing?" Dr. Lee's voice was barely a whisper. "Like forming patterns?" "Affirmative. And there's something else. The electromagnetic shielding, it's not keeping something out. It's keeping something in, something that's trying to get out." Before Command could respond, alarms suddenly blared through the facility. But it wasn't because they'd been detected. Something else was happening. "All teams report," Colonel Zhang barked. "Alpha Team here. The scientists are rushing to their stations. Something's happening in the lower levels." "Gamma Team reporting. Sir, you need to see this. Transmitting video feed now." The feed showed the facility's lower level, where massive machines hummed with power. But it was what was happening in the center of the room that caught everyone's attention. A containment field was failing, and something was emerging. "It's not just a bioweapon," Dr. Lee realized, horror in her voice. "They're trying to combine biological agents with something else. Something that shouldn't be possible." Lieutenant Patel watched as the scientists below scrambled to contain whatever was happening. At their microscopic size, they could see what normal-size observers couldn't. The way reality itself seemed to bend around the containment field. "New orders," Colonel Zhang's voice was firm. "This just went from reconnaissance to elimination. Whatever they're doing down there needs to be stopped. Now." The tiny soldiers checked their weapons. They might be microscopic, but their firepower was still lethal. Each round carried the same kinetic energy as a normal bullet, just concentrated into a much smaller point. "Command, requesting permission to engage," Patel said, watching as more alarms started blaring throughout the facility. Permission granted. All teams converge on the lower level. Stop whatever they're doing, but maintain containment protocols. We can't risk letting anything escape. As the teams began moving toward their new objective, they could feel vibrations through the metal ducts. Something big was happening below. The facility's power readings were spiking, and the scientists' movements had become frantic. The tiny army was about to face something that no military force had ever encountered before, and at their size, they would see it unfold in terrifying detail that normal-size observers could never comprehend. The real mission was just beginning, and it was nothing like what they had trained for. The three teams converged on the lower level through different ventilation shafts, each getting their first clear look at what they were really dealing with. At their microscopic size, they could see details that normal-sized observers would miss, and what they saw sent chills down their spines. "Command, are you getting this?" Lieutenant Patel's voice was steady but tense. Through their specialized cameras, they transmitted images of what looked like a massive laboratory chamber. But it wasn't the equipment that was concerning, it was what was happening inside the containment units. The particles, they're not just organizing themselves, one of the scientists at base reported, studying the feed. They're evolving, changing their structure in response to different stimuli. Dr. Lee's voice cut in. "It's worse than that. Look at the pattern recognition sequences. These aren't just programmable viruses, they're trying to create something that can identify specific genetic markers, something that can target particular traits in human DNA." The implications hit everyone at once. This wasn't just a weapon, it was potentially a tool for genetic warfare. A way to target specific populations based on their genetic makeup. "All teams, hold position," Colonel Jung ordered. "We need to understand exactly what we're dealing with before we move in." Through their enhanced vision, the tiny soldiers watched as scientists in pressure suits worked frantically at their stations. The facility's alarms were still blaring, but now they could see why. One of the containment units was showing signs of stress, its electromagnetic field flickering ominously. "Sir," reported Corporal Chen, "I'm seeing something strange in the computer data. They're not just programming these particles to target specific genes. They're trying to make them self-replicating. And there's something else." The corporal transmitted images from a nearby computer screen. Even at their tiny size, they could read the data scrolling past. "They're incorporating some kind of artificial intelligence," Dr. Lee realized, her voice filled with horror. "They're trying to create particles that can learn and adapt on their own, that can evolve to overcome any resistance they encounter." Lieutenant Patel watched as more warning lights began flashing around the main containment unit. "Command, whatever they're doing, it's getting out of control. The containment field is failing." "Sir." Alpha Team's leader cut in. "We've found their research data. It's worse than we thought. They've already run tests. Small ones, but—" "How many casualties?" Colonel Jung asked grimly. "No casualties, sir. That's what's strange. The test subjects, they changed. The particles didn't kill them. They rewrote their DNA." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the facility's alarms seemed distant as everyone processed what this meant. "They're not trying to kill people," Dr. Lee whispered. "They're trying to change them, to rewrite human genetics on a massive scale, to force evolution in whatever direction they choose." As if to emphasize her words, the failing containment units suddenly sparked violently. Through their microscopic perspective, the soldiers could see particles beginning to escape, tiny machines merged with biological material, each one programmed with a purpose that could reshape humanity. "New objective." Colonel Jung's voice was firm. "We need to shut this down. Completely. All research data needs to be secured or destroyed. The samples need to be neutralized. And whatever's in that containment unit needs to be stopped." "Sir," Lieutenant Patel asked, "what about the scientists?" "Non-lethal tachydowns if possible. They'll need to answer for this. But stopping their research is the priority. We can't let this technology exist." The teams began moving into position. At their size, they could easily access the facility's critical systems. A few well-placed charges could disable the power grid. Their miniaturized weapons could destroy key equipment without risking the release of the particles. But as they prepared to move, something changed. The failing containment unit wasn't just leaking now, it was changing. The particles inside weren't just organizing themselves anymore. They were forming into something. Command, Patel reported, his voice barely a whisper. I think we know why they're wearing pressure suits. These particles, they're not just programmed to rewrite DNA. They're programmed to remake everything they touch, to reshape reality at the molecular level. Through their enhanced vision, they could see it happening. The escaped particles were starting to affect the very air around them, creating patterns that shouldn't be possible, changing the fundamental structure of matter itself. The scientists were no longer trying to contain the breach. They were running, sealing bulkheads behind them, abandoning their creation to whatever fate awaited it. All teams, Colonel Jones' voice cut through the chaos, you have new orders. Whatever's happening in that chamber cannot be allowed to spread. You're authorized to use any means necessary to contain it. The facility's nuclear failsafe is an absolute last resort. We can't risk spreading these particles into the atmosphere. The tiny army prepared for battle, knowing they were about to face something that had never existed before. A threat that could literally rewrite the rules of reality itself. And they were the only ones small enough to stop it. The world at microscopic scale was already strange, but what the soldiers witnessed next defied all logic. The escaped particles were reshaping the air itself, creating patterns that looked like crystalline structures floating in space. All teams, sound off, Lieutenant Patel ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around them. Status report. Alpha team in position near the main power controls. Beta team ready at the secondary containment systems. Gamma team monitoring the spread pattern. Sir, it's accelerating. From their vantage point in the ventilation system, they could see the entire laboratory. The failing containment unit was now a swirling mass of light and matter, its electromagnetic field completely collapsed. The escaped particles were spreading outward in a perfect geometric pattern, like a snowflake made of pure energy. Dr. Lee, Patel called through the comm, what exactly are we looking at? Back at base, Dr. Lee was analyzing the data streams with growing concern. The particles are forming a lattice structure. They're not just changing matter, they're creating new forms of it. Forms that shouldn't be possible under normal physics. Can we stop it? There was a pause before she answered. Theoretically, yes. The process requires enormous energy. Cut the power, and the particles should become inert. But what? You'll have to get past that. She didn't need to specify what that was. The crystalline structures were spreading faster now, creating a barrier between the teams and their objectives. Colonel Jung's voice crackled through the comm. Lieutenant, we're picking up temperature changes in the affected areas. Whatever that stuff is, it's starting to generate its own energy field. Understood, sir. Alpha team, begin your approach to the power systems. Beta, stand by to initiate containment protocols. Gamma, keep tracking those spread patterns. We need to know where this thing is going. The teams began moving through the ventilation system, using their tiny size to their advantage. At their scale, they could see gaps and weaknesses in the crystalline structures that would be invisible to normal-size observers. Watch your step, Patel warned as they navigated around a particularly dense cluster of transformed matter. We don't know what this stuff will do to our miniaturization field. Suddenly, alarms blared through the facility, different from the previous warnings. These were deeper, more urgent. Sir, one of the technicians at base reported, the facility's automated systems are detecting atmospheric changes. The particle effect is starting to reach the upper levels. Time frame, Colonel John demanded. At current spread rates, 15 minutes before it reaches the surface, maybe less. The stakes were clear. If the effect reached the outside world, there would be no stopping it. The particles would spread through the air, changing everything they touched, rewriting reality itself. Alpha team status? Patel called. Almost at the main power junction. But sir, the crystals are growing faster here. They're drawn to the energy sources. New plan, Colonel John cut in. Beta team, redirect to the facility's coolant systems. If we can't cut the power immediately, maybe we can freeze the process. The soldiers moved with practiced precision, their miniaturized gear allowing them to slip through gaps that would be microscopic to normal-sized people. But the transformed matter was spreading faster now, creating new obstacles with every passing second. Gamma team reporting. Sir, we're seeing something new. The patterns, they're not random anymore. They're forming specific shapes, almost like what? Like they're trying to build something. Dr. Lee's voice was tight with concern. The AI component, it's not just adapting anymore, it's creating, using the transformed matter to construct something. We're at the power junction, Alpha Team reported, but we've got a problem. The crystals have already reached it. They're integrated with the systems. Same at the coolant controls, Beta Team added. This stuff is everywhere. Lieutenant Patel surveyed the scene from his position. The laboratory had become an alien landscape of impossible geometries and shifting light. The air itself seemed to bend around the transformed areas. Dr. Lay, he called, what happens if we use our weapons on the crystalline structures? Unknown. The energy discharge could disrupt the transformation process, or it could make it worse, Colonel Joan finished. But we're running out of options. The facility's warning systems shifted tone again, higher, more urgent. On the base's monitors, the spread pattern was accelerating exponentially. 10 minutes to surface breach, a technician reported. Lieutenant Patel made his decision. All teams prepare to engage. Weapons free, but watch your targets. We need controlled bursts, not wild firing. The tiny soldiers readied their miniaturized weapons. Each round carried the same force as a normal bullet, just concentrated into a microscopic point. At their scale, they could see weak points in the crystalline structures that larger forces would miss. On my mark, Patel ordered, watching as the transformed matter continued its inexorable spread. The future of humanity hung on what they did in the next few minutes. The tiny army was about to wage war against an enemy that defied the laws of physics itself. And they were the only ones small enough to see where to strike. Fire! Lieutenant Patel's command echoed through the comms, and the microscopic battlefield erupted into chaos. At their size, every shot looked like a streak of lightning cutting through the transformed air. The crystalline structures responded to the attack in ways nobody could have predicted. Where the miniaturized bullets struck, the structures didn't shatter, they rippled like hitting the surface of a pond. Waves of energy pulsed through the alien geometry. Impact assessment, Colonel John demanded from base. The structures are adapting, Alpha Team reported, rearranging themselves around the impact points. But wait, there's something else. The energy discharge is affecting their growth pattern. Dr. Lee's voice cut through the comm chatter. The bullets aren't destroying the structures, but they're disrupting the transformation process. Keep firing at the same points, create a resonance pattern. The tiny soldiers adjusted their aim, concentrating fire on specific nodes where the crystalline formations seemed to pulse with energy. At their scale, they could see how each shot sent vibrations through the alien lattice. 8 minutes to surface breach, came the warning from base. Beta Team, report. Patel called as he lined up another shot. We've reached the secondary power system, sir. The crystals are thick here, but we're seeing fluctuations in their energy field. Something's happening when we hit them repeatedly in the same spot. Through their enhanced vision, the soldiers could see what normal-sized observers never could, microscopic fractures appearing in the transformed matter where their concentrated fire had struck. The impossibly perfect geometries were showing signs of stress. All teams focus fire on those fracture points, Patel ordered. Create a containment perimeter. The soldiers moved with practiced precision, their tiny size allowing them to target weaknesses that would be invisible at normal scale. Each shot carried the kinetic energy of a full-size bullet, focused into a point smaller than a dust mote. Suddenly, one of the crystalline structures collapsed, creating a chain reaction through the surrounding formations. The alien geometry began to twist and warp, its perfect patterns distorting. Energy readings are fluctuating, Dr. Lee reported excitedly. The resonance is working. The transformation process is becoming unstable. But their success had consequences. The remaining structures began moving faster, as if aware they were under attack. Tendrils of transformed matter reached out like living crystal, trying to bridge the gaps created by the soldiers' attacks. 6 minutes to surface breach, the base technician announced. Alpha Team, status on the power systems. Almost there, sir. The crystal degradation is giving us access, but the soldier's voice cut off as a surge of energy rippled through the lab. Alpha Team, respond, Patel shouted. We're okay, came the reply. But this stuff, it's not just adapting anymore, it's fighting back. They could all see it now. The crystalline structures were no longer spreading randomly. They were moving with purpose, forming barriers around critical systems, protecting their power sources. The AI component, Dr. Lee realized, it's learning from our attacks, evolving its defense strategies in real time. Then we'll just have to evolve faster, Patel responded. All teams switched to pattern Delta 7. Unpredictable attack vectors, random timing. Don't let it adapt to our rhythm. The battle took on a new dimension. At microscopic scale, the soldiers could use surfaces that would be smooth to normal-sized forces. They ran along walls, swung from invisible textures in the air, fired from impossible angles. 5 minutes to surface breach. The transformed matter responded to their new tactics, but slower now. Its perfect patterns became more chaotic as it tried to counter attacks coming from all directions. Beta Team here. We've reached the main coolant controls, ready to initiate emergency shutdown. Gamma Team reporting. Sir, the fracture patterns are spreading. The whole structure is becoming unstable. Lieutenant Patel surveyed the battlefield. The laboratory had become a war zone at microscopic scale. Crystalline structures twisted and shattered under concentrated fire, while others grew and reformed in patterns that defied physics. Dr. Lee, he called, what happens if we destabilize the entire formation at once? Theoretically, the transformation process should collapse in on itself, but the energy release? Could it breach containment? No, she replied after a moment. The energy would be directed inward. The process would essentially reverse itself. 4 minutes to surface breach. Colonel Jones' voice was firm. Do it. All teams, coordinate your attacks. Hit every fracture point simultaneously. The tiny soldiers took up positions around the laboratory, each targeting a specific weak point in the crystalline structure. At their scale, they could see exactly where the alien geometry was most vulnerable. On my mark, Patel ordered, watching as his targeting system aligned with a particularly unstable node. Around the lab, other tiny weapons came to bear on similar points. 3 minutes to surface breach. Ready. The crystalline structures seemed to sense what was coming. They began moving faster, trying to repair the damage, to adapt to the threat. Aim. At microscopic scale, time seemed to slow. Each soldier could see the pulse of energy flowing through the transformed matter, could predict exactly where their shots would have the most impact. Fire. The lab erupted in a microscopic lightning storm as dozens of tiny weapons fired simultaneously. Each shot struck a precise point in the crystalline structure, creating a resonance pattern that amplified through the entire formation. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the impossible geometry began to fold in on itself, its perfect patterns collapsing into chaos. The tiny army's first real battle was reaching its climax, and the outcome would determine more than just the success of their mission. It would determine the future of reality itself. The laboratory erupted into chaos at a microscopic scale. The crystalline structures were collapsing, their perfect patterns shattering under the coordinated assault. But the tiny army's victory celebration would have to wait. Energy spike. Dr. Lee's voice cut through the comm system. The containment field is completely failing. Through their enhanced vision, the soldiers could see what was happening. As the transformed matter collapsed, it was releasing all its stored energy at once. The air itself seemed to ripple with waves of impossible force. 2 minutes to surface breach, came the warning from base. Alpha Team, Lieutenant Patel called, status on the power systems. Almost there, sir. The crystal collapse is giving us access, but the energy release is making it hard to wait. The soldier paused. Sir, you need to see this. The team's camera feed showed what they'd found in the facility's mainframe. It wasn't just research data, it was a complete blueprint for remaking reality itself. The scientists weren't trying to create a weapon, Dr. Lee realized, studying the data. They were trying to create a new kind of matter. Something that could be programmed, controlled, used to reshape the world at will. 1 minute 30 seconds to surface breach. Colonel Jones' voice was tense. Can we still stop it? Yes, Lieutenant Patel replied, watching as more crystalline structures collapsed around them. But we'll need to do more than just cut the power. We need to get to the mainframe's core, the physical hardware where they stored the control algorithms. At their microscopic size, the soldiers could actually see the electronic pathways in the computer systems, rivers of electrons flowing through silicon valleys. They could also see how the transformed matter had begun integrating with the circuitry. Better team, status on coolant systems. Ready on your command, sir, but we've got another problem. The energy release is affecting our miniaturization field. We're seeing fluctuations. Dr. Lee's voice sharpened. The field collapse is accelerating. You have maybe 30 minutes before automatic restoration begins, and that's assuming the energy disruption doesn't trigger it sooner. 1 minute to surface breach. Lieutenant Patel made his decision. New plan. Alpha team, continue to the power systems. Beta, stand by with the coolant. Gamma, you're with me. We're going into the mainframe itself. The tiny soldiers moved with desperate speed. At their scale, they could slip between the computer's components, navigating through a landscape of circuit boards and processors that looked like a futuristic city. 45 seconds to surface breach. Sir, called one of the soldiers, the transformed matter, it's following us into the systems, like it knows what we're trying to do. They could all see it. Tendrils of crystalline energy were seeping into the computer's architecture, trying to protect its core programming. 30 seconds to surface breach. Alpha team in position at main power junction. Beta team ready at coolant controls. Lieutenant Patel and Gamma team had reached the central processor, a vast expanse of silicon and metal at their scale. The control algorithms would be stored in the memory banks nearby. Sir, called a soldier from Gamma team, look at the data patterns. Through their enhanced vision, they could actually see the program running, pulses of electricity forming complex patterns in the circuits. But there was something else, something that made their blood run cold. The program, Dr. Lee whispered, studying their video feed. It's not just controlling the transformed matter. It's evolving, growing, becoming something more than what it was programmed to be. 15 seconds to surface breach. Orders, sir. The teams waited, weapons ready. Lieutenant Patel looked at the evolving program, at the transformed matter slowly encasing the computer systems, at his soldiers waiting for his command. At their size, they could see everything in perfect detail, including exactly where to strike. All teams, execute on my mark. Alpha, cut main power. Beta, flood the coolant systems. Gamma, targeting solutions on the memory banks. We hit everything at once. 10 seconds to surface breach. The soldiers took their positions. Each one could see their target with microscopic precision. 5 seconds. Ready. 4. Aim. 3. The transformed matter surged forward, as if making one final attempt to stop them. 2. Lieutenant Patel's finger tightened on his trigger. 1. Execute. Multiple actions happened simultaneously. Alpha team severed the power connections with microscopic precision. Beta team triggered a cascade of supercooled gas through the system, and Gamma team opened fire on the memory banks, their tiny bullets striking exactly where the program was most vulnerable. The result was immediate and spectacular, even at their scale. The transformed matter, cut off from power and flash-frozen, began to crystallize. The evolving program, its hardware destroyed, started to break down. But they weren't done yet. The energy release from the collapsing matter was creating new problems. Sir, called one of the soldiers. The miniaturization field, it's destabilizing. They could all feel it now. The microscopic world around them was starting to shift, to blur at the edges. Their time was running out faster than expected. The tiny army had won their first major battle, but now they faced a new challenge, getting out before they returned to normal size inside a computer system. And somewhere in the facility above them, alarms were still blaring, warning of one final threat they hadn't yet discovered. All teams evacuate now. Lieutenant Patel's order echoed through the comms as the microscopic world around them began to waver. Their miniaturization fields were failing faster than expected, destabilized by the energy release from the collapsed transformation matter. Gamma team, clearing mainframe systems, he reported, leading his soldiers through the labyrinth of circuit boards that now looked like they were melting at the edges of their vision. Alpha, Beta status. Alpha Team clear of Power Junction, heading to Extraction Point. Beta Team, we've got problems, sir. The coolant release is creating ice crystals in the ventilation system. Our exit route is blocking up. At their current scale, even tiny ice crystals were like massive barriers. The soldiers could see them forming in real time, beautiful but deadly geometric patterns growing across their escape route. Time to field collapse? Colonel Zhang demanded from base. Dr. Li's voice was tense, 15 minutes maximum. But these readings, the energy disruption could trigger restoration at any moment. The entire facility was shuddering now. The destruction of the transformation program had set off a chain reaction through all systems. Alarms blared at multiple frequencies, some so high that only the miniaturized soldiers could hear them. New route, Lieutenant Patel decided. All teams converge on Sector 7. We'll use the electrical conduits to reach the surface. Sir, one of his soldiers called, what about the research data? If any of it survives. Already handled, Alpha Team's leader cut in. We uploaded a virus into their systems while shutting down the power. Everything's being wiped as we speak. The teams moved with practiced efficiency, but their microscopic world was becoming increasingly unstable. The edges of objects seemed to blur, distances became hard to judge. Their miniaturization fields were breaking down. 10 minutes to critical field failure, Dr. Li warned. They reached the electrical conduits, massive tunnels at their scale, designed to carry power throughout the facility. Now they were mostly dark, thanks to Alpha Team's work. Up we go, Patel ordered. Use your grappling lines. And watch for power surges, there might still be some juice in these lines. The tiny soldiers began their ascent, climbing what would normally be vertical copper cables but to them were like huge metal columns. Their enhanced vision could see every microscopic imperfection in the metal, giving them perfect handholds. 8 minutes to field failure. Suddenly, their comms crackled with urgent activity. Sir, we're picking up movement above us. The facility's automated security systems are still running on backup power. Through the walls of the conduit, they could see them, security drones the size of cities from their perspective, sweeping the facility for intruders. They can't detect us at this size, one soldier said. No, Lieutenant Patel replied grimly, but they will when we start returning to normal size. And we need to be well clear of this facility before that happens. 6 minutes to field failure. The climb seemed endless. At their scale, even a few feet of vertical distance was like scaling a skyscraper. Their muscles burned with effort, but they couldn't stop. Not now. Movement, someone called. Something in the conduit with us. They could all see it, particles of the transformed matter, not quite fully neutralized, flowing up the conduit like a glittering stream. The program might be destroyed, but some of its creations were still active, still trying to fulfill their last commands. 4 minutes to field failure. Almost there, Patel encouraged his teams. I can see light above us. Through a gap in the conduit, they could indeed see illumination, normal, natural sunlight. They were nearly at ground level. Sir, called one of the soldiers, the transformed matter, it's accelerating. The stream of glittering particles was moving faster now, racing them to the surface. If it escaped into the open air, 3 minutes to field failure. Lieutenant Patel made a quick decision. Better team, those coolant charges you didn't use, drop them, all of them. The soldiers quickly released their remaining coolant charges into the conduit. The supercooled gas expanded rapidly, freezing everything in its path, including the transformed matter. 2 minutes to field failure. They reached the conduit exit, a ventilation grill that looked like a massive metal maze at their scale. Beyond it, they could see the outside world, tantalizingly close. 1 minute to field failure. Get clear now. The team squeezed through the grill openings just as their miniaturization fields began to noticeably fluctuate. The world around them started to shrink, or rather, they were beginning to grow. 30 seconds. They ran across what felt like an endless expanse, but was actually just a few feet of concrete, trying to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the facility. 15 seconds. They could feel it happening now, the world shifting around them as they grew larger with each passing second. 5 seconds. Everyone down. Patel ordered. Growing back to normal size while running would be problematic. 3, 2, 1. The world suddenly snapped back into normal perspective. Where there had been tiny soldiers, there were now full-sized men and women in tactical gear, lying prone on the ground a safe distance from the facility. Lieutenant Patel clicked his radio, his normal-sized radio this time. Command, all teams present and accounted for. Mission accomplished. Back at base, Colonel Zhang allowed himself a small smile. Well done, Lieutenant. I think we can officially say the tiny army has proven its worth. Dr. Li was already analyzing the data they'd recovered. The applications of this technology, if we can prevent it from being weaponized. That's a discussion for another day, Colonel Zhang said firmly. For now, let's just be glad we stopped it from falling into the wrong hands. As cleanup teams moved in to secure the facility, Lieutenant Patel gathered his soldiers. They looked different now, normal-sized, ordinary military personnel. But they had seen things that no other soldiers in history had seen, fought battles at a scale that most people couldn't even imagine. They had laughed at the tiny army once. Nobody was laughing now. Because when the world faced a threat that couldn't be fought with conventional forces, it was the soldiers nobody could see who saved the day. The age of microscopic warfare had begun, and humanity's first line of defense would be the soldiers who could fight at any scale, who could infiltrate any facility, who could see threats that no one else could see. The tiny army had proven itself, and this was just the beginning.